Okay, everyone, welcome back to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm Go Local News editor Kate Nagel. We are just 1 week after the first public hearing for the new Pawtucket Red Sox stadium proposal on the site of Apex, and I have a stadium expert here with me in the studio via Skype who we've talked to before. He's been quoted in Go Local. He wrote Field of Schemes nearly 20 years ago now, but continues to write on the website Field of Schemes about stadium and stadium funding around the country. Neil deMause, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Well, I know you are busy. You were at the Village Voice the last day. How were things there?
It's a little weird. It's the last day for the print edition. It's not the last day for the website. So, it's a weird transition. But we're managing. We got some good food on the last of those days. We're doing fine.
So the printing will stop, but you can still follow Village Voice online. But it's the Field of Schemes that we've talked with you about many a times, Neil. We talked with you back with the initial Paw Sox proposal when they were looking at $195. Now they're charging full steam ahead. We're in the midst of public hearings here in Rhode Island. What was your sense when you got wind that they were sort of going for 2.0 with the new proposal here in the state?
I mean, I'm not surprised. 2.0 is absolutely standard in the stadium game, as is oftentimes 3.0 and 4.0 and 5.0. As I like to say, you don't have to have a very good batting average when you're trying to get a new stadium, because you really only have to get one cheap single up the middle and you win, and you get the cash you're looking for. So I'm not surprised that they came back, and I'm not surprised that they, aren't floating the idea of, we might move to Worcester and talking down McCoy Stadium and saying that it's obsolete. And again, it's all standard parts of the stadium playbook. The trick is going to be, what happens when it's actually up to, proving the public money, because, it's a significant chunk of change.
And here we are in Rhode Island. Again, you saw the lay of the land the last go around. You've been following, I know, a little bit here. I know you just talked with Pat Ford with the Libertarian Party here. From the right, from the left, whether it's the progressive Democrats, the Republicans, the Libertarians, who are opposed to this outlay of money, again, to the collective group of what are billionaire owners, we're now in the midst of public hearings, so to speak. Do you, around the country, you follow all these different stadiums? We were having a listening tour the last go around before the plug was pulled. But again, as you talk about the standard playbook, do we see this often, this sort of, let's tell the public that their input is necessary and that it will be taken into account, and then a decision is finally made at the last moment that may or may not take that into consideration?
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite, terrible stories about this was when the Yankees and Mets were talking about getting money for new stadiums, and they announced the plans on, I think it was a Wednesday, and the following Friday, they put a bill before the state legislature to get rid of the parkland they wanted to use to build the new Yankee Stadium. And people in the neighborhood in the Bronx didn't even know about it for weeks and weeks afterwards. So, the obligation to go before the public and have public hearings and public input is often not exactly honored. I think they have a little bit of a better luck with that on the West Coast, where you can force a public vote, right? You can have an initiative that can say, we need to have public approval of this. So, I will say, look, at least it wasn't done behind closed doors. Another example is the Atlanta Braves, where everything got negotiated in secret, and the thing got passed before anybody really knew about it. So this is exactly the time when you really want to be asking tough questions.
Now, let's talk a little bit. Clearly, there's support from the community and Pawtucket business leaders there. There's support from adjoining communities, from elected officials there. There's support from labor. Obviously, jobs would be associated with the building of a new stadium. But as, again, we had talked about the opposition from all ends of the political spectrum. The first hearing, we saw about 4 hours of pro-Paw Sox. Saw about 3 hours because it did get to be close to 1 o'clock in the morning. But, we saw the deal essentially killed in 2015 by the rampant opposition. But here we are. Again, it's a little bit of a war of attrition, 2.0, 3.0, 4.0. What happens if the assembly goes and votes for it and you have this whole contingent of folks who were so vehemently opposed?
you need to find another hook, whether it's trying to get the city council to approve its piece or, any other angle that you want. I mean, again, this is why you really want to stop it before your legislative vote. And I think the question here, I mean, look, I'm a baseball fan, so I think the question isn't do you want to keep the, Paw Sox happy, and do you want to keep them in town? It's what's the price point at which this makes any sense, right? They already have a fairly popular, stadium. Yes, it's older, but it's a stadium. The team is there, and I think it's 38 million total. Is that right?
Yeah. The unfortunate 38 number, which has residents here in the state.
Right. So the question is, at what point is it a price point that makes any sense? And I think we're starting to see some cities. Seattle came back at their arena proposals and said, you have to do something that's going to make sense and get a return on the city's investment. The mayor of Calgary, Naheed Nenshi, is right now going through that with the Calgary Flames hockey team. So you want to see them saying not just, okay, is this a better deal than some other cities have done, which is an extremely low bar, or are you going to say, well, show us why it's worth $38 million to us? And if it's not worth $38 million to us, then, let's figure out what's the price that makes sense.
You see a lot of the opposition here, Neil, say they point just north of the border and point to Bob Kraft and what he's done with Patriot Place up there and say, look, he did that all with private funding. Why doesn't the group of billionaire owners put their own money into this? Kind of, as I said, pocket change to the collective group of them. And the argument is also, if it's such a great investment, why isn't there private backing?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at teams like, so the Red Sox are probably putting more money into some players on their roster who aren't even doing much for them than they spend on a stadium. But, it also raises the question of if you're really saying, we're not going to do this deal if we don't get $38 million from the public, is that just a bluff, right? And it's saying that they don't want to do it because they're trying to play chicken with Rhode Island, or is it the fact that they don't really want a new stadium? They want the money that comes with the new stadium, and that's so often the case where it's not that the stadium itself would be a cash cow. It's that if you go to the state of Rhode Island and say, hey, can we get a check for $38 million? They're probably going to send you away. If you say, hey, we want a new stadium, but we need $38 million to build it, then you suddenly get taken seriously. And that's why so many of these stadium arena deals happen, again, regardless of whether they're actually profitable for the team.
And we just had a piece this week on Go Local regarding at the federal level, again, this is the proposal by Cory Booker and others that would look to limit the use of municipal bonds because they're exempt from federal taxes. Does that have any potential at the federal level?
Yeah, I mean, it's a small piece of the puzzle, right? Because one of the ways in which team owners get subsidies, really on a federal tax level for stadiums, is to use these federally tax-exempt municipal bonds, which give them a cheaper interest rate at the cost of money that's not going to the federal treasury. It's something that has been criticized for years and years and years. Remember Dennis Kucinich was holding hearings against it. President Obama proposed getting rid of it. Everybody always seems to talk about how it doesn't make sense for the federal government to be paying for stadiums to be built in one city versus another city, but it never quite seems to get anywhere. Maybe a little bit of momentum is building for it, but again, even if that happens, that will reduce the level of subsidies, but it's not going to stop teams from asking cities and states for money. And I'm slightly worried that what it will do is cause teams to just ask cities and states, oh, we have to use these more expensive bonds now. How about you increase the amount of money you give us to make up for that?
Well, it's weighing the scales of justice, so to speak. So here we are. We've got 5 more hearings here in Rhode Island, Neil. We're curious to see if they're going to be sort of replicas of what we saw last Thursday night. If you were a betting guy, what do you think happens here in Rhode Island?
I don't know. I mean, usually the team owners win out eventually, but again, eventually can be a long time. I've watched, again, like you mentioned before, I've been writing about this for an awful long time now, And I remember, the Minnesota Twins owners going back and back and back for 10 years, the Florida Marlins owners every year saying, this is the last year we're going to do it. If we don't get it this year, we're out of here. And then they'd come back the next year and ask for it again. So I don't know that I would necessarily put a lot of money down on it being successful this year, although it might be. But this is going to be a long, drawn-out battle, and even if they don't get it this year, they'll be back next year. So I, think really just the best advice is keep holding the line, but also again being very specific about what's in it for the public. You just have to keep asking that question. Yes, this might be good for the team, but show us why this money is worth it.
You said, show me the money. You know the current proposal that's on the table. Is this a good deal for Rhode Island taxpayers?
Man, it's really hard to see how you're going to make $38 million back from just the incremental amount of money that you would get from moving the team from one part of town to another part of town, right? Mm-hmm. Already economists across the country have looked at these deals and found that even if you bring a new team to your city, you don't get a huge boost in sales tax receipts, income taxes, per capita income, any of those things. But if you're really just talking about, well, the same fans are going to be going to the game, but maybe they'll spend a little more money, it's really hard to see how you can get that kind of benefit.
And what do you have to say? We've written on it, and you have as well, these numbers that we see reported, especially at the minor league level, declines in attendance. What is the state of baseball at this point? Are we going to see continued declines?
I think all sports are kind of a weird place right now where they've become very dependent on huge TV revenues, mm-hmm. which are in turn dependent on the crazy fees that cable companies are willing to pay to ESPN and other sports channels, right? I think everyone knows that 10 years from now, the TV landscape is not going to be the same as it is now. TV as a thing even exists, or if we're all just watching our computers.
Yep.
So I don't think baseball is going away anytime soon, but minor league baseball is a lot more risky than Major League Baseball, right? Major League Baseball, that they're going to have teams in the big cities. Minor league, it tends to do well in boom times, and then in times of economic stress, that's the first thing that people cut back on. So again, I don't think I would worry too much about the Hawks going away. But, if you want to pick an economic development project to put your money on, I don't know if I'd make minor league baseball my first choice.
Oh, and you've seen the arguments made in other locales when they talk about a new stadium, they talk about a new ballpark, they talk about mixed use, they talk about concerts and events and other sports teams. Does that have an economic impact, or is that just lip service?
A little of each. It does have some economic impact. It's better to have a place that can be used for, to have restaurants and concerts and other things like that, if only because one of the problems with sports stadiums is that they're dark most of the year, right? And, there's most days there's not a game going on there because it's either the wintertime or the team's on the road. That said, development of sort of mixed use development doesn't necessarily create new development or new tax revenues because, you build a restaurant and it means somebody isn't going to a restaurant somewhere else. Yep. Even you build like housing, it may mean, okay, great, but somebody isn't building a housing project somewhere else because, that developer is like, oh, great, here, look. It's so it redirects the economic activity. It does not necessarily create it.
Zero sum. Neil, any other factors folks should consider here? As I said, you had the luxury of listening to you talk to Pat Ford, wanted you here today and go local. Anything else, parting thoughts as we're here in the studio, as we've been able to pick your brains in years past? What should folks know just in the coming weeks?
Yeah, I think the most important thing that people in other cities would say is keep close attention to what the claims are that are being made, close attention to the numbers, and ask a lot of questions, because I think the team owners in these circumstances are very dependent on, again, going to that playbook and saying the team's going to leave without, this, it's going to be a huge economic boon, and just question, because they're really not used to having to answer those questions. And when their feet are really held to the fire, like you see in some other cities, sometimes they will, lower their demands or, at least sort of temper what they're expecting. So, it's an uphill battle because they obviously have a lot more money and power. But I think there are examples where citizens have sort of, been able to push back successfully. I think that's a good lesson to learn.
And do you think Worcester really could be a viable alternative?
I mean, it's minor league baseball, so a lot of places could be an alternative. On the other hand, the question I would ask is Worcester going to be a more lucrative alternative, right?
Yeah.
So first of all, in terms of fan base, and then second of all, in terms of what they're offering. So far as I've heard, it's not like Worcester is coming up and saying, oh no, hey, we got $30 million right here in our pocket. You can have it, right? And that's the problem is you don't want to be in a position where you're bidding against yourself. And you're saying, okay, we don't want to risk the team going anywhere else, so we're going to put up lots of money without even knowing what the other offers are.
That is true. We're keeping an eye on all other possibilities, but right now, obviously, the hearings that are up ahead. So, Neil, I appreciate your taking the time out of your busy day. The last print publication of the Village Voice. Read them online, but we will surely talk with you soon, Neil. We appreciate your time today.
Good to be here.
Okay, thanks, Neil. We'll talk soon.